Well, I'm coming back to this job now. I've been off it for a few days while I've been doing real paid work for real paying customers. But at this stage I had the body largely assembled. It's missing the meter, and the meter cord and drum needs to be fitted to it. And the front of the camera, this is all reassembled, and this of course lacks the shutter. And so my next task really is to service the shutter, get that mounted to the front of the camera. Once that's sorted out, I can put my meter into the camera body and then mate the front of the camera complete with its shutter with the camera body, and it'll have the makings of a working camera. I'm not sure whether I checked the shutter earlier to see if it functions. I suppose it's worth having a look. Just cock the shutter. I've got a tool here that's useful for doing that. We set this to an 1/8 of a second. Let's see what sort of a result we get. Oh, very sluggish to close. Okay, so the shutter sort of works, but is pretty gummied up. So strip the thing down. We'll start from the front. Remove the front retaining ring, which in this type of shutter is a clip. Take off the shutter speed setting cam ring. Now you can probably see there that's got a lot of oil on it. There shouldn't have been any oil there. Remove the pinion. Remove the internal cocking ring, I suppose you could call it. Again, this is quite oily. The main drive spring, we'll unhook that and have a look at the state of it. It's quite relaxed. It hasn't got enough tension. It's not uncommon, of course. They've all got tired over the years. Here's the main drive cam. Yes, 2 gear trains are the retard gear train, which controls the effective shutter speeds. That's held in by 2 screws, and the self timer or delay action, which is held in by 1 screw. And both of those speed trains are quite dirty looking, and they'll need to go through the ultrasonic cleaner in some naphtha, I think, to clean those up. What more have we got here? Well, I need my block of wood to work on, I think, for a start. That's better. Can't work without a block of wood. We'll just cock that, unhook that spring, remove that screw, remove that screw, get that spring before it decides to take off, lift this up and take out the shutter release lever, take that off, take our flash contact off, just release that, take out that component. Next I want to unhook that spring, and I need a pair of pliers for that. I like to put a screwdriver down here to stop that arm from being able to move. Then I can grab that spring and pull it forward and unhook it without having to overstress it. If you don't stop this arm from moving, inevitably it will follow the end of the spring, and you're stretching the spring further and further trying to get to the point where you can unhook it. Take the pallet wheel off, take the B lever off. There's the spring that retains the B lever, a screw that retains the B lever has a single spring on it in this case, which operates the B lever and also runs against the pin here on this setting lever for our self timer or flash sync. There's one other small spring here needs to come off. It's right here. Now I normally hold a toothpick or something on there to stop it being able to escape. Lift that spring out, unhook it, lift it out. The shutter can be split now. So at the back we've got 3 screws hold this plate in place. This plate retains the setting ring for the flash sync speed or self timer. And this lever is the lock which stops you changing that setting accidentally. So this can come out of the body. We're down to the shutter case itself and mechanism plate. So 3 screws hold the mechanism plate into the shutter case. That was very tight. Struck a few lately that have been exceptionally tight. You need to keep a lot of downward pressure on your screwdriver in a case like that so that the screwdriver can't cam out and damage the screws. Right, if I press down on that I should be able to separate these. Here's our case. Now the case has nothing in it in a shutter like this because it's got no diaphragm, no aperture mechanism. If it's clean and there's not a lot of oil about, you don't need to remove this plate and clean under it. If there's any sign that there's oil around here, it's worth removing that to get out any oil that might have seeped behind there and is biding its time to come out and seep out to the front again after you've cleaned the shutter. Here's the shutter and blades. There are 6 blades in all. 4 of them are identical and 2 of them are different. One of these blades has got a dent in it. I'll show you that. You can see that catching the light. There's a high spot right here, a dent on the back of it. Means somebody's probably poked or prodded at that shutter with a tip of a pair of tweezers or a screwdriver or something. Yep, and if we look here, there's a dent on that blade there. Now almost certainly those 2 dents would overlay. That's a shame. I'll see if I can get those dents out because I don't want to replace the blades if I don't have to. They're not particularly deep. If I can get them out, those blades should move smoothly. This one's more of a worry because the dent's right on the edge of the blade and it may mean that the blade doesn't want to run smoothly over one of its neighbours. However, let's carry on here. I need to remove 3 screws holding the lens tube here to the mechanism plate. One of the screws is slightly longer because it holds this retainer plate in place, and that retainer plate is where the main drive spring for the shutter hooks against. So unhook this. Here's our lens tube, the blade actuating ring and the mechanism plate itself, which in this case is quite dirty. Not very oily, just quite dirty. So that'll all have to be cleaned up. And here basically all of these components have to be cleaned up and reassembled, and the case here, I'm just going to have a very close look at that. One of the important things here is that these 3 screws that hold that plate in place must be tight. If they're loose and they back out, they will catch. There, that screw was loose. If they're loose, they'll back out and catch on a shutter blade. That screw was quite loose too, so I'll get those screws out completely. Remove that plate for cleaning and put everything back. Those 3 screws are often missed if people are servicing the shutter, because of course there's no reason to delve in here typically. It's just an empty void, there's nothing in there, it's not even particularly dirty. I'll want to clean these components and put them back together. I'll start cleaning up this shutter case. There's a bit of colour coming off there, but it could be anything. Got to do the case inside and out. This is quite clean. Shutters are often quite greasy. This is quite clean. So this retainer plate here, which retains nothing of course, it's just a smooth surface that the diaphragm blades can run across. Oh, not the diaphragm blades in this case, is it? Shutter blades, no diaphragm blades. Just making sure this is clean. That can go back in the case. So here I've got this flash sink contact here. That sits on the, I've got that sitting over the edge of the block of wood so I can see what I'm doing. I'll move you a bit closer here. Move this a bit closer to me. The retainer plate. Well, this plate here only goes in one position, which is not hard to discover because there are no screw holes, and screw holes don't line up anywhere else. Let's see if I can discover which way it goes. Not there. Not there. Not there. There. I've got screw holes in all 3 positions. So we'll run those screws back down. When they're all in position, I will tighten them up. They're all in position, I'll nip those screws up tight. That's good. In that case, I'll give one last wipe out with some naphtha to take those marks off that plate. And that case is ready to go. I can turn my attention to the mechanism plate, start cleaning that. This is dirtier. That's the yellowish colour, that's indicates oil contamination typically. The shutter in the Retina IIIS rangefinder camera is very similar to the shutter in the Retina IIIS 3 or 4. And a lot of the components, like the blades and so forth, are interchangeable. There are just a few components that are quite distinct to the rangefinder shutter. It's cleaning up quite well. Just occasionally, if you've got a shutter that is very oily, you may need to clean this plate by immersion in solvent and work the levers to get any oil out from underneath them. There's no such problem here. Just checking that the pallet moves freely, that the levers move freely. That all looks good. Here's the lens tube. This has no thread up the inside, it's just plain on the inside. And the outside edge, the top here in particular, that's the top. The retaining ring sits in the top, but the cocking ring moves around that section in there, and the shutter speed setting cam plate too. And the internal cocking ring, that's the important piece, that needs to be able to move freely, so you don't want any undue roughness in here, or it to be clogged up with old dried grease. That's all nice and clean, and you can see there's not much coming off on the cotton bud there on that final pass. The blade actuating ring, this is the piece that swings the shutter blades out and back in again when you fire the shutter. And typically this will have been lubricated with graphite grease. You can also lubricate it with graphite powder, that works very well. Has the advantage that being dry, it will not attract and stick dust and grit in place. Or you can use a thin smear of molybdenum paste, or even graphite grease for that matter. Just be sparing with it, and all should be well. I've picked up a bit of cotton fluff there, I'll just get rid of that. That looks good. Those pieces can be reassembled. So, the reassembly. We're on camera only just. This is the detent spring here, which acts to hold the shutter blades in the closed position firmly unless activated. I'll get this blade actuating ring in position. It only goes in one position. Swing my detent over and catch it behind that pin that it operates against. Our lens tube goes on in one position only. Otherwise your screw holes won't line up, so you'll know you've got it right. I'll put that plate in place. Now the longer of the three screws goes through that plate. The two shorter ones go in the other positions. And if you mix them up, you'll end up with a screw sticking out, which will catch on shutter blades and cause you grief. Or you will end up with a screw that was too short running through the bracket, and when you do the screw up, it's easily stripped out if it's only going through the plate by one thread or 1.5 threads, and instead of 2 or 3, you apply the same amount of torque and you'll just strip them out. So I'll check those 3 screws are tight. check that the blade actuating ring will move. That's good. And I'm going to lubricate that with some graphite powder next. I've got some graphite powder loose in this container because this is where I typically do this job. What I normally do is just dump some down the edges there. And then work the blade actuating ring backwards and forwards. It can be sometimes tricky because there's a couple of catches there which will act to block the blade actuating ring, and inevitably they fall in and block it while you're trying to do something useful like this. That's the other one. Yep. That one. So I'll just work that a few times, work some of that powder in, and then knock off the excess and go and blow this out completely to get all the loose powder away. Well, that's all clean now, and that's ready to have the shutter blades put back on it. I'll just put this into the blades open position, and that mechanism plate's ready to have the shutter blades put on it and the shutter case fitted over the top. So I'll put that to one side because I need to look at these shutter blades. Now, two of these had marks on them, slight dents. There's one of them. And what I'm going to do is try and rub that dent out. So I'm using the tail of a pair of tweezers here because it's nice and smooth, and I'm just forcing that dent down and rubbing it. And it hasn't disappeared entirely, but it's very less pronounced than it was, and that's probably going to cause me no problem. And the other one was this one, and there's a slight mark on that dent on that edge. I'll rub that down. And again, that's greatly improved. I think that'll do me. I think that'll probably work. So these blades all need to be cleaned. I'm just going to take one as an example. This one will do. And I'll clean it here. Now this, I know that looks as black as sin against that white paper, but I can see what I'm doing. So I'll clean that blade with some naphtha, and what I'm interested to see is whether the marks on the blade all go away. If they do, this is all I'll need to do to them. If the blade marks don't all go away, I'll want to polish this with some metal polish, some brassite. And this face in particular looks a little bit duller. It's quite clean. It certainly would work well. This surface is quite good. I'm going to polish that anyway. Get those blades in as good a condition as I possibly can, I think. So I'll show you how I do that next. So I have a blade here, and I've got some metal polish brasso here. I'm just getting some on a cotton bud and polishing that surface. And I'm working on a hard foam block, closed cell foam block, which is very good because it's forgiving enough. It's supports the blades well, but there's no danger of scratching them. So that blade's been polished now. If I clean that blade with some naphtha, which I'll do now, I'll check it again and see what sort of state it is in compared to its mate that I'd previously cleaned but not polished. Yes, that's in good shape. That's the blade with that damage on the corner, on the tip, which looks much reduced. But that blade's certainly good. It's a better finish on there than it had previously. You can probably see it as I get it to catch the light. It's quite good. It's in very good order. So that's what I've got to do. I've got to go through those 6 blades. One of them is a narrow blade, a cover blade. I'll work my way through the 6 blades, polishing them to get them clean, and basically all I'm doing there is, to a large extent, it's cosmetic in this case because the blades are in quite good order. But I want the blades to look new again, because at the moment they sort of look a little bit used. I'll bring you back once I've finished polishing the rest.